Hi, everybody. This is Allie. Glad to be back with you again today. Today, I'm going to offer you the archetypal story of the Chariot, which is the seventh card in the major arcana. And we'll talk about why it's not the charioteer. Why is he not what the card is? There's lots of really great information on this card. And, I first started reading on the card because it's about power. It's about strategies and choices and imagination and evaluation and exploration. And I got Putin in my mind. And then I realized it's not Putin. It is Vladimir Zelensky. Actually, he is a great charioteer. For the Chariot. And he's doing exactly, I think you'll see that as we go along. So what this card represents is a particular state of consciousness, not necessarily, again, we're talking about the chariot, not the charioteer. And look at the way that the chariot is laid out. It's got the fine decorations at the top. It's got wings on the front, down in this area. And in this case, it has two sphinxes. It has a black sphinx and a white sphinx, but the sphinxes aren't looking at each other. They're looking out and away. Behind the charioteer is the city. And in the picture, it looks like the chariot is elevated and is bigger than the city. What it represents is bigger than the city. You'll also note that the chariot is on the water. You'll see the water over on the side of the cards. So that's consciousness. We're dealing with consciousness here. We're dealing with a lot of interesting things in these cards. Some of the symbolism that's on these cards has also been on other cards we've talked about, numbers 1 through 6. We have the crown with the star on it. We have the wand he's holding in his right hand. I'll make sure you can see it over here. It's a wand, like the magician had. And there's some other things that are on his outfit that symbolize different hieroglyphics. He's got the curtains at the top, and he's got two moons on his shoulders. It's just a fascinating card, and one that I'd never really clearly understood. And now I feel like I have a somewhat of an understanding of it, so I can explain it to you. We've heard of the term the chariots of the gods. We've heard that term many times. And a chariot, as you know, is something that carries somebody. If you ever watched Ben-Hur was on a chariot, but he was the one in charge of the reins. You'll notice in here, there are no reins. There is nothing that shows he's in charge of the two animals or sphinxes in front of him. In some card representations, you see horses, but in this old Rider-Waite deck, you see the sphinxes, which makes it even more interesting because we don't think of sphinxes as pulling a chariot in the real world. So the fantasy element comes out with something like that as well. So yes, there are states of consciousness. And this indicates that he uses the chariot to ascend and descend from heaven. In the Hindu Ramayana and in other, the Bhagavad Gita, we had a charioteer. We had Arjuna, who was able to fly through the sky. In other myth, we find this. It's just if you don't know about those myths, if you don't know those stories, then it doesn't make any sense to a lot of people. So the charioteer is the man that's behind here. He is probably a royal person, someone who has a lot of authority, someone who speaks to that authority and stands for that authority and doesn't really worry about what's going on below. It's not his problem. And you'll see this fertile green grass growing underneath the two animals. When we become aware of our personal consciousness, Jung said, which is the sum of all of our experiences. And we integrate that consciousness with the collective unconscious, we're individualized or made whole. If you're not familiar with the collective unconscious, it is what has happened, what experiences have been and are within the stream of consciousness of humanity and that we have access to. The collective conscious, when something goes into the collective consciousness or is manifest in the collective consciousness, we see a lot of similarities in things. For instance, one could say that when Mr. Hale saw a comet go through the sky at the same time as Mr. Bopp did, we named it the Hale-Bopp comet. But because it was in the stream of consciousness, because it was within the collective, the whole, the sum of all experiences of life on Earth, it's possible that the two tapped into that at the same time. And so that's why many times you'll see somebody think of something at the same time somebody else has, and they're not copying it. It just has occurred to them and they have decided to move on to that thing that has occurred to them. So we're free at this point, once we've individualized, once we've individuated into our fullness, we are free to be a nonconformist. And what is really wonderful is many of us choose to then be also conformists as well. You know, if we're a nonconformist, we buck the tide. We don't, people find us to be odd or strange or whatever. When we're a conformist, though, I think sometimes we look weak. We look like we have to say the things that we say or agree with what's going on in order for people not to go against us in any ways. The Chariot asks us to develop our personality and to master our difficulties or our circumstances, and we can have our own personality to work well into the world and achieve our own progress. I think the Chariot was a conundrum to me at first because, and it actually has brought me a lot of edification since I figured out what it means, because I'm going through my own issues. And I think it's asking me to master the difficulty that I'm in and just move on and don't let that stop me from being who I am and what I want to do. We can have our personalities to work well in the world and achieve our own progress once we know who we are and we have integrated ourselves into a whole personality. This also can symbolize achievement, determination, will, speed, and force. And it asks us, does the end justify the means? So let's talk a little bit about that with Zelensky. So Zelensky is very determined not to give up. He's using his will and the collective will of the people of Ukraine in order to stay the course, not leave, not surrender. He's very determined. He uses his will, and the will of the people agree with him. And they have done all manner of things very speedily, to get together to do what they need to do to try to stop the Russian invasion. And they have their own way of doing the force that they're using. As you well know, they've used Molotov cocktails, which is something that they had at hand, very old school, but they went with that. But here's the problem. It does ask us if the end justifies the means. And if you ever read Machiavelli believes that any end, anything justifies the means. In other words, waterboarding, probably for Machiavelli, is justifiable because he needs to know what people know, and they're not going to tell him, so we'll waterboard him. If I was pulling this card for Vladimir Zelensky, I would say, I'm not sure I understand where he's coming from. And he is an intrepid leader. He has reached maturity. He knows how to handle the people, and the people agree with him, and so on and so forth. He's become a hero of sorts. But does his what's happening to his country justify all the death that has happened to children, to old people, to ladies, to all that. And I don't mean that he should roll over and put his feet up in the air and surrender. But I think that is an answer that we may or may not have to ask ourselves at the very end. Right now, it's not looking like it's a good thing to do, but it's the determination and the progress and the achieving of the goals that they have as a collective in their country that is bringing forth what's going on. This is an old energy archetype, meaning that, and I think you can understand that if you were looking at this chariot and the current situation over in Europe, what's going on? It's very old. Somebody posted some pictures and they said these could have been taken in World War II. They look so much, they're in the rubble and the people are, trying to escape and so on and so forth. That's very old energy as well. We thought we had moved into new energy, but remember, we haven't got to the tower yet. The tower has to come down before anything can be replaced and built up again. So the chariot is paving the way. Power, force, and rule. And this is a person who has power. And that's why at first I thought it was Putin. But Putin doesn't really have power. We're watching as the sloppy war going on with his men. They didn't even know what he wanted them to do. They were brought in on a fool's mission. This person acts as a guiding force to bring in new energy or ideas, and he doesn't drive with reins, nor is he driven by anything. Everything is by will, power, and determination. So I really think once I read that this clinched it for me, that this card represented the type of person as Vladimir Zelensky. What was really confounding and wonderful in here was that the book said that each one of us, every one of us, has a chariot available to use to take an imaginative journey up into space or across the world. Perhaps this is through astral travel, I'm not sure. But a chariot is very precarious. If you know anything about them, if you've ever seen one, you know that they come this way. And you really have to master the balance between these two animals. If one decides to go this way or this way, your whole chariot goes over. But remember, he's not leading the chariot. Number 7 card connects with destiny and definitely transformation. And in our case, it's our transformation of our consciousness. Plato says that there are 2 horses usually with a chariot. But in our cards, it becomes 2 sphinxes. Kind of a strange situation here. They're not near each other. They're not tethered. They're just basically lying there. And it represents what used to represent how warriors came back from battle. And now we use parades and things like that bring, our warriors or bring our generals or whatever through and for glory. But the 2 sphinxes represent the wills in a developed ego. These 2 represent will in a developed ego. Sometimes we want to go this way. Sometimes we determine to go this way, and we have a battle. We have to keep balance, or our battle, things will not work out for us. The charioteer holds a wand like the magician, as I explained. Oops, this side. And his power is to subordinate the will of these 2 sphinxes, and he's using his wand in order to do it. Okay. The glowing square around his neck here, little square, is his vibrant nature. There's an 8-pointed star on his crown, which shows mental energy. And the chariot, again, looms larger than the town. The sphinxes control their instinctive desires. And this is a problem. We have a will, but we also have desires. And our will, we have to control the will so that we don't turn to the wrong desires or overindulge in eating, drinking, fornication, whatever it is. He wears the symbols of the priestess the Hierophant, the Magician, the Empress, and he has a seat much like the Hierophant and the Emperor. The Sphinxes represent personal maturity, and the Chariot represents a civilization that's creates order out of chaos using raw materials in the cities and agriculture. And that's exactly what's going to happen. If Zelensky wins this war, he's going to have to still create order out of chaos because everything has been blown up and burned and moved. One of the best stories it said in here was the Sphinxes were the typical riddlers. They told riddles. And if you were to go to the Oracle at Delphi and be asked to get in, the riddle of the Sphinx was what creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? And anybody that can't answer that question gets devoured by either the Sphinx or lions or whatever. In the story of Oedipus, Oedipus is asked that question, and he knows the answer. He knows that it is man, and because we crawl before we walk, and then when we're older, we have a 3rd leg, which is a cane. So he answers this question well, and he arrives in Thebes, and after killing his father, he had a prognostication that he would marry his mother and kill his father. And so he does. He meets a man on the road, and the man on the road is actually his real father, but he thinks his father is the king of another area of that country. And then when he gets to Thebes, he doesn't know that his mother was the queen, and he ends up marrying the queen, not knowing that she is his mother. And so he looks to be a mature person. He can answer the questions. He can become the king. But his downfall is he doesn't listen. He doesn't remain open. He doesn't examine life in the way that he needs to. He just takes things for granted, and it ends up being his downfall. So when thinking about the Chariot, think about all of those aspects of balancing out. And you'll see, too, the black and the white balance each other out, balancing out our personal nature, our subconscious nature, and integrating our consciousness, our personal consciousness, with the collective unconscious, and being able to access higher realms, archetypes, and so forth. One of the best things at the Oracle at Delphi, or maybe it was Plato who said it, I can't remember, but I think it was Plato. He said, the unexamined life is not worth living. By virtue of the fact you're here, doing what you're doing, staying engaged, learning more things, you are examining life. You are examining the things that may help you to grow and be better. But someone else wrote, the unlived life is not worth examining. Which one are you? The person has a powerful will. They successfully control some situation by their will. And the situation contains contradictions that have not been brought together, but they are held under control because he's got the control of these animals. This is not to stress too highly the negative undertones. When it is up the right way, it means success. So if you see this, it does mean success in reading. But remember, it's not about the charioteer. It's all about the chariot. Thank you so much. God bless you all. See you next time.